Hey guys. Tonight we're peeling back the soft, quiet ache of missing someone who was never really yours to miss. You know that feeling, when a random memory flares up while brushing your teeth or lying in bed. And your chest gets heavy like it's holding water. There's no real event that caused it. No breakup, no epic falling out. Just distance. An absence you can't explain. You remember things that didn't happen. You replay conversations that were more imagined than spoken. And somehow, it hurts just as much. And here's the kicker. You probably won't survive this level of delusion without a bit of gentle unraveling. But we'll do it slowly. Like slipping out of a dream you didn't want to end. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your location and what time it is where you are. You'd be surprised how many of us are up at the same strange hour, quietly nursing the same ache. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through your day like normal, replying to emails, petting the dog, maybe laughing at a dumb meme you've seen 3 times already. But out of nowhere, there it is, that shadowy feeling. That phantom ache. It's not quite sadness, not quite nostalgia, it feels like longing. But you're not even sure for who. Or what. Just this low-grade hum under your skin. Like a song you half remember but can't find the name of. Your brain, bless its dramatic tendencies, starts filling in details. A glance someone gave you. A conversation you once had that felt more meaningful than it should have. A fleeting connection with someone who was never fully present in your life, but still took up a shockingly permanent seat in your memory. You start wondering, did I really feel something there? Did they? The thing is, your brain doesn't always distinguish between real emotional intimacy and the idea of emotional intimacy. That distinction, between someone who was genuinely there for you and someone who made you feel like they might be someday, is blurry. Especially when you're tired, vulnerable, or just a little bored. Psychologists call it emotional investment inflation. Okay, they don't, but maybe they should. What they do call it is a form of parasocial attachment, where your mind bonds with someone based more on internal experience than mutual interaction. And sure, it's usually used to describe people falling in love with celebrities or influences, but it happens in real life too. That coworker who smiled at you once. The acquaintance who had a deep late-night conversation with you during a group trip and then vanished back into their own orbit. It was a moment, just one, but your brain, it drafts a whole romantic subplot and adds a soundtrack. Here's a mainstream fact to keep us grounded. Studies on romantic attachment show that people often idealize those they have limited access to. The less you actually know about someone, the more you fill in the gaps with your own preferences and desires. It's called the halo effect, the tendency to assume that if someone has one attractive trait, say, a warm smile, they must have many others too, like kindness, depth, emotional availability. Now sprinkle in a fringe tidbit. In medieval France, there were reports of villages claiming to be haunted by romantic dreams, literally dreaming of being in relationships with spirits or strangers they'd never met. These experiences were seen as spiritual visitations or evidence of past life lovers. Today, we'd probably say they're projections or sleep state hallucinations, but the emotional weight, still real, still potent, and historians still argue whether unrequited love ever truly existed before romantic literature gave people the language to feel it. Like, did ancient humans feel this ache before Shakespeare made it poetic? Or did we invent the ache to match the poetry? You roll your eyes at yourself. I didn't even date them. You think, why am I still thinking about this person? But logic doesn't stand a chance against a brain hungry for story and closure. In the absence of real events, your mind improvises. That soft smile they gave you, maybe it meant something. That song they posted on their story, obviously directed at you. That moment they looked your way during the meeting, practically a marriage proposal. Except, they weren't really there. Not in the way you needed. Maybe they never meant to lead you on. Maybe they had no clue you even felt a spark. Or worse, maybe they did. but they liked the attention more than they liked you. So now you're here, in this strange limbo of missing someone whose presence was more ghost than person. You scroll through old chats, re-watch that one Instagram story like it's a lost scene from a better version of your life. Your friends tell you to move on, but they don't get it, because you're not trying to move on from a relationship. You're trying to untangle yourself from a hope you didn't even fully realize you'd planted. And missing someone who never really showed up isn't just sad, it's confusing. It makes you question your perception, your worth, your ability to trust your own gut. Because if you could feel that much, and it still wasn't real, what does that say about you? But slow down, breathe. It says you're human, with a brain that longs for connection, that sometimes gets carried away, that mistakes kindness for consistency, chemistry for commitment. And while that hurts, it also means you're alive, open, feeling, which is something to hold gently, not judge. Let's walk through this ache together, not to erase it, but to understand why it lingers, and maybe, slowly, to learn how to let it go. You wake up the next morning, and the feeling is still there, soft, but persistent, like the faint echo of a dream you can't quite remember. You stretch, blink at the ceiling, and for a second you think, was any of that real? The connection, the almosts, the imagined moments that now feel oddly more vivid than some of your actual relationships. It's frustrating, like missing a character from a novel you never finished reading. And now your thoughts spiral. You go through your morning routine, but your brain keeps drifting back, replaying certain looks, snippets of conversation, text messages you never deleted. There was something there, wasn't there? Here's where things get weird, in a perfectly explainable way. According to behavioral psychology, your brain doesn't store memories like files in a cabinet. It stores feelings and reconstructs moments around them. So when you remember that brief, beautiful night when you talked for hours, your mind isn't playing back the transcript. It's retrieving the emotion asterisk, the sense of being seen, of something about to begin. And it fills in the rest with fragments, like AI patching together a blurry image. This is where the term emotional mirroring asterisk comes in. That's when you feel so much in someone's presence that you assume they must feel the same thing. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes, what you feel is just your own capacity for connection reflecting back at you. You're not imagining the moment, you're just assigning it meaning it didn't necessarily have for them. And here comes the mainstream fact. Neuroscience tells us that the same neural pathways involved in experiencing social connection are triggered when we imagine those connections. Your brain doesn't care whether the closeness was mutual. If it felt real to you, the chemicals still fire. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all your favorite internal cocktails make an appearance. Now cue the fringe tidbit. There's a documented condition called limerence, where a person becomes obsessively infatuated with someone, often based on minimal actual interaction. It's not just a crush, it's a full-on romantic hallucination built from scraps. The wild part, it can last for years. People stuck in limerence report feeling euphoric highs from a smile or a short message, then devastated by neutral responses. It's like an emotional stock market built on imaginary assets. And of course, scholars still argue whether limerence is a true psychological disorder, or simply the extreme end of normal romantic longing. Is it pathology, or just poetry gone rogue? As you sip your coffee, or maybe your fourth iced latte of the day, your thoughts drift back to the conversations that almost went somewhere. The flirty banter that stopped too soon. The texts that seemed like they had meaning, until they didn't. You start to wonder, did they know what they were doing? Or was I just reading too much into it? That uncertainty, asterisk, was it real? Or just me, asterisk, is its own kind of grief. Because when someone leaves your life without ever fully entering it, there's no breakup, no clean ending, no closure, just silence, a ghosting of a dream you didn't even know you were having. So your brain does what it does best, it fills in the blanks. It rewrites the past with better lighting and softer music. It imagines what could have happened if only you'd said the right thing. If only they'd stayed. If only timing had been kinder. You start to replay interactions like surveillance footage, looking for evidence, a glance, a tone, a pause, something to prove it wasn't all in your head. But let's be honest, sometimes it was all in your head. And that's okay. The head is where stories begin. The heart follows, sometimes foolishly, and together, they weave these intricate tapestries of meaning that don't always match reality. This is where emotional patterning sneaks in. That's the psychological tendency to re-experience familiar emotional templates from your past, especially unresolved ones. Maybe the person you miss reminds you, unconsciously, of someone else who made you feel seen, then left. Maybe the longing isn't about them at all, but about a chapter in your own story that still feels unfinished. And so, here you are again, missing a presence that never fully formed. Grieving a role that was never cast. It's a strange kind of heartbreak. Quiet and persistent. The kind you don't talk about with friends because it sounds ridiculous. I miss someone I never even dated isn't exactly a conversation starter. But the ache is real. The confusion is real. And the vulnerability, absolutely real. You find yourself checking their online presence, scrolling just enough to feel close, but not enough to fully move on. You overanalyze their posts, their playlists, their likes. You try to decode the digital breadcrumbs they leave behind, hoping for a signal, a reason, a clue that you weren't entirely deluded. But digital connection is a minefield. Social media rewards ambiguity. A heart react to your story doesn't mean love. A song quote might not be about you, yet your brain, desperate for validation, reads signs where there are none. We're biologically wired to seek patterns, to make sense of chaos, to turn uncertainty into narrative. So you write one, quietly, over time, and it begins to feel more real than the person ever was. There's a small comfort in that, in crafting your own story, in letting yourself feel deeply, even when the source was a wisp of potential. But there's also risk, because the longer you cling to the idea of someone, the harder it becomes to see them, and yourself, clearly. And yet, knowing all this, you still miss them, maybe not them exactly, but the version of them that lives in your mind, the feeling they sparked, the mirror they briefly held up to your soul. You carry that with you, even when they're long gone, even when they never fully arrived. You tell yourself you're moving on, but that ghost still shows up. Not dramatically, not in a sheet with eye holes, but in subtle ways. A smell that reminds you of them. A song that drops out of nowhere and hits just right. A stranger with the same laugh. Suddenly, they're there again, full technicolor in your chest, even though they were barely grayscale in your real life. This is the thing about people who were never really there. They leave the deepest imprints. Not because of who they actually were, but because of who you imagined they could become. The relationship never had a chance to disappoint you, so your mind paints it with flawless strokes. It's the IKEA effect, but with feelings. You built it, so you love it more. Here's a mainstream psychology nugget. When we don't have enough data about someone, our brains fill in the blanks using projection. It's a defense mechanism, a shortcut to understanding. You don't know their full story. No problem. Your subconscious just hands them traits you'd like them to have. Kind, witty, emotionally available, great texter, boom, soulmate. Projection feels safe, comfortable. You control the narrative, but the danger lies in confusing that fantasy with reality. Because people aren't blank slates. They come with history, habits, baggage, and most of it you never saw. So you miss someone who, in truth, may not have been capable of giving you what you thought they were. Still, the feelings were real, the longing, the hope, the quiet thrill when they replied just fast enough to mean something. That's the tricky part. You felt it, and your body doesn't care whether it was mutual. It only remembers the hormonal response. Let's throw in a fringe tidbit here. Some therapists suggest that this kind of grief can activate what's called ambiguous loss, a term usually used for people mourning someone who's alive but emotionally unavailable. Like a parent with dementia or a partner who's shut down emotionally. In your case, the person was never fully present, but your bond with them still vanished. So your brain processes it like a loss, even without a clear event or goodbye. And here's where scholars start to bicker again. Some psychologists argue whether ambiguous loss even qualifies as grief. After all, if there was no deep attachment, how can there be deep mourning? Others argue the opposite, that ambiguous loss is even harder to process because it lacks closure. There's no final scene, no resolution, just an open tab in your emotional browser that never quite closes. So how do you manage it? You might try distraction, diving into new hobbies, texting exes you shouldn't, or deciding that now is definitely the right time to reorganize your closet by color and trauma category. You stay busy, hoping the absence won't echo so loudly. But it still does, especially at night, when the notifications stop, and all the voices go quiet. You find yourself reaching mentally toward them, not even for connection, sometimes, just for sense. You want to understand why someone so brief left such a lasting impact. You crave meaning. You want the equation to balance. And that's very human of you. See, humans are meaning-making creatures. We can't leave mysteries alone. When we don't get answers, we invent them. That's why conspiracy theories exist. That's why people think Mercury being in retrograde can explain their breakups. It's easier to believe there's a cosmic reason than to accept random disconnection. So you find reasons. You tell yourself it was bad timing, that they were scared, that they felt it too but didn't know how to show it. You build a story to soothe the sting. And sometimes, that story helps you heal. But sometimes, it keeps you stuck. Because when you're grieving someone who wasn't fully there, the loss becomes less about them and more about the version of you they briefly awakened. You miss the version of you who felt exciting, connected, seen, and now that they're gone, it's like that version of you left too. Let's pause and hold that thought. Because it's powerful, and a little sad, and totally normal. You miss the mirror they held up, the reflection of a version of yourself that felt alive. And you wonder if you'll ever feel that again, or if it was just some fluke of chemistry and timing. But here's the sleepy truth. That version of you, they still exist. They're still in there, even without the ghost to reflect them. You don't need someone else to unlock your best self, but it's okay to mourn the moment when it felt like someone did. The hardest part is admitting that it wasn't real, at least not fully. You're not crazy for feeling it. You're not weak for missing it. You're just human, and being human means sometimes your heart gets ahead of the facts. Sometimes your imagination is more loyal than your reality. So you carry this ache. It softens over time, but it doesn't vanish, because you're not just missing a person. You're missing the version of a life that might have been. And, might have been, is one of the heaviest phrases in the emotional dictionary. You think about reaching out, maybe just to say hi. Maybe just to see if the connection was more than one-sided. But you hesitate, because you know that even if they replied, it probably wouldn't change anything. The past can't be rebooted just because you're still haunted by its browser history. Still, the thought lingers, the desire for closure, the temptation to poke the ghost and ask, was any of it real? But deep down, you know, whatever answer you get won't be enough. It's not about facts anymore. It's about a feeling that lived and breathed inside you for a little while, and refuses to leave quietly. So you keep walking, maybe slower, maybe still glancing over your shoulder, but walking nonetheless. You think you're fine. Days go by, weeks, maybe. You start sleeping through the night again, well, kind of. You stop checking their social media. You even delete the chat history, like a tiny, grown-up ceremony for letting go. But then something absurd happens. You pass someone in the grocery store wearing their cologne, and boom, your brain hurls you backward like it's trying to win an emotional rodeo. Why does that happen? Why do you miss people who didn't even take up space for very long? Or worse, never truly showed up at all? There's a sneaky little psychological mechanism that might be at work here. Emotional memory tagging. It's a process where emotionally charged experiences, no matter how brief or confusing, get stamped into your memory with extra glue. Your brain essentially yells, "Hey, this mattered," and files it under important. Even if objectively, it wasn't. That's why a fleeting connection, a late-night conversation, or one intense week of texting can leave a deeper dent than years of lukewarm relationship routine. Your mind isn't measuring time, it's measuring intensity. And intensity gets bookmarked, highlighted, and sometimes, annoyingly, replayed on a loop. Now here's the mainstream fact of the night. Our brains cannot distinguish between imagined emotional closeness and actual experienced closeness. If you deeply felt the connection, even if it existed almost entirely in your head, your brain codes it the same way it would a real relationship. A romantic one-month situationship can burn brighter than a 6-year marriage where everyone just watches their own Netflix shows in separate rooms. So yeah, your grief is real, even if the person was only half present. Even if it ended before it began. Even if it was mostly you doing the emotional heavy lifting. Your nervous system doesn't know nuance. It just knows gone. And here's the fringe tidbit for this round. There's emerging research into how parasocial attachment can show up in real-life interactions, meaning you're kind of forming a relationship with a version of a person in your mind. Like people do with celebrities. You fill in the gaps, project your own ideals, and get emotionally attached to what is partly a construct. So yes, missing him is a little like missing a character in a show that never aired. You had a season plotted out in your mind, and it got cancelled before the first episode dropped. That might sound dramatic, but it also explains why the longing doesn't obey logic. Because the loss isn't just about them. It's about the story you didn't get to finish. The scenes you wrote in your head. The moments you imagined would unfold if things had gone just slightly differently. You weren't only grieving a person, you were grieving a plotline. And that's where things get even more tangled. Because every once in a while, the story pops back up. Maybe they watch your Instagram story. Maybe they text, "Hey, sorry for the delay," after 6 weeks of radio silence. And that single breadcrumb can reignite the entire fantasy. Now, psychologists are split here, no surprise. Some say that intermittent reinforcement, yes, the same principle used in slot machines, is partly to blame. If a person is sometimes available and sometimes absent, your brain gets addicted to the unpredictability. You start chasing the high. You check your phone 100 times a day, waiting for the next hit of maybe. Others argue that it's not just the reinforcement, it's the illusion of resolution. The unfinished business, the echo of potential, the idea that this time, maybe it'll work, maybe they'll show up the way they never did before. Spoiler alert, they usually don't. But it's okay to hope. Hope is the human condition on loop. And when someone has sparked even a flicker of that in you, it's hard to extinguish. You remember the moment they seemed sincere. The time they really looked at you. That shared laugh over something small but vivid. Your brain clings to those moments like a kid clutching a shiny pebble. You wonder if you made it all up. If it was all in your head. And to be honest, maybe parts of it were. But the feelings were real. The warmth, the excitement, the way your heart beat differently when their name popped up. That's not fake. That's chemistry, hormones, and attachment systems doing what they were built to do. Even if the person didn't earn that attachment. Even if they didn't stick around long enough to deserve the impact they left behind. You don't miss them, exactly. You miss the idea of them. You miss the way they made you feel about yourself. You miss the dream they briefly helped you believe in. And yes, it's embarrassing sometimes. You find yourself still scrolling through old messages. Or Googling what they're up to now. Or replaying old voice notes like a secret little hit of nostalgia. But you're not pathetic. You're just processing. You're just trying to give shape to something that was foggy from the start. It would be easier if they'd been awful. If they'd ghosted you in a blaze of unkindness. If you had something concrete to point at and say, "See, that's why it ended." But often, with these almost people, the ending is just silence. A fade out. A slow retreat without explanation. And silence leaves too much room for speculation. So your brain keeps spinning. Keeps wondering. Keeps running diagnostics on a ghost. Trying to figure out where it all went wrong. And the wild part, that wondering isn't pointless. That ache you feel, it's data, it's feedback. It's your inner system showing you where you long to be seen, to be held, to be chosen. So instead of shaming yourself for still missing them, you could ask, what part of me was I hoping they'd fill? And how can I give that to myself? Because, spoiler alert, no one else is going to do it for you. Especially not someone who was only ever halfway there to begin with. So tonight, as you lie in the dim quiet, know this: it's normal to miss someone who wasn't fully real. It doesn't make you naive. It makes you imaginative. It means you felt something deep and honest in a world that often runs on detachment and distraction. And maybe that's your superpower, not the missing, but the meaning you give to even the smallest connection. You just need to point that power in the right direction, toward someone who actually shows up, who brings more than almost. You lie there, half asleep, with your phone face down on the nightstand, because even now, a tiny part of you still hopes it might buzz. It's ridiculous. You know, they're not coming back. They probably weren't even here to begin with. And yet, here you are, stuck in the lingering haze of something that barely began. Why? Well, let's peek into another weird corner of your brain: attachment projections. When you met them, maybe in a coffee shop, maybe through a dating app, or just at the worst possible moment of your emotional timeline, you didn't just see who they were. You saw who they could be. Your brain, ever the overachiever, filled in the blanks faster than a Netflix algorithm guesses your next binge. You projected traits. You imagined conversations that never happened. You saw kindness where there was ambiguity. You assigned depth where there might have just been a well-practiced smirk. And before you even knew their middle name, your subconscious started constructing a mental model of this person. Not who they actually were, but who they could be for you. Here's the mainstream psychology bit: we do this all the time. Humans are hardwired to make quick judgments and predictions about others, especially in potential romantic or emotionally significant scenarios. Our brains prefer coherence over chaos. So when someone shows up who fits even 60% of your emotional wish list, your brain goes, close enough, and paints in the rest. But here's the twist: when that person disappoints you, you're not just mourning the real person they probably ghosted, flaked, or emotionally evaporated. You're mourning the version of them that only existed in your head. And that version, they were fantastic. They understood you. They texted back. They never sent confusing half-hearted emojis instead of actual words. So of course, you miss them. Because you didn't fall for a stranger, you fell for a carefully curated hallucination your attachment system helped build. And the more you needed connection at that time, the faster that fantasy assembled itself. Now, for a delightfully fringe tidbit, there's a growing body of thought around something called attachment imprinting, the idea that early childhood patterns get stamped into our adult lives not just through family relationships, but through these micro-romantic experiences. That means someone who breezed in and out of your life in 2 weeks might still press the exact button that reminds you of being ignored, or chasing, or not feeling good enough. And your brain just loops that childhood playlist like a DJ who refuses to retire. This is why you can feel devastated by the departure of someone you logically know you barely knew. Because emotionally, they opened a door, and behind that door were all the unhealed echoes you've been carrying around since middle school. Or earlier. You weren't just reacting to them, you were reacting to every, almost, you've ever lived through. Every time you hoped someone would stay and they didn't. And here's where scholars still argue. Some say this projection process is simply a psychological defense, a coping mechanism for unmet needs. Others argue it's a deeper, more primal function, that your mind wants to see wholeness in people, because that's how it creates emotional safety. The idea of someone being almost the one is safer than admitting they were never going to be it at all. And so, your heart writes a better story than reality delivered. You end up with nostalgia for something that didn't really happen. Like remembering a dream you swore was real because it felt that way in your bones. The way they touched your arm. The way they said your name. The way you laughed about something so obscure it felt like a secret only the two of you shared. But maybe, they didn't even remember it. Maybe they were never really there the way you were. And now, every song reminds you of them. Every coffee shop feels like their silhouette might reappear. You scroll your playlist and can't listen to your favorite track anymore because it was playing the day they first sent you that voice note, the one where their voice cracked a little. And you thought this person feels something too, but that was just you, feeling everything. You didn't hallucinate the moment, but you might have been the only one who held it like treasure. This is the part where it helps to step back, to ask, what were you really looking for? Someone to see you, to choose you without hesitation, to rescue you from the quiet ache you don't talk about. Because chances are, what you miss isn't them. It's the feeling of being almost loved, almost chosen, almost understood. You crave completion, but they only offered you a preview. And here's another cruel trick of the mind: the more mysterious they were, the harder they are to forget. Certainty closes a chapter. Mystery keeps it spinning like a fidgety carousel. What were they thinking? Did they care at all? Were you just convenient? Did they think about you after that last goodbye? That, maybe, fuels the ache far longer than a clear no. But even while all this is happening, this aching, longing, re-looping of the what-ifs, you're evolving. Your brain is rewiring. Your heart is learning. Even in the pain, there's movement. And movement, no matter how small, is progress. So yeah, maybe they weren't real, not the version you built in your head. But you were real, the version of you who hoped. The version of you who showed up with curiosity, with kindness, with wonder. That version deserves someone who meets them there. And that someone might not make you wait, might not vanish, might not just almost love you. You're allowed to miss the story that never got written, but don't let it stop you from writing the one that still can be. You're sinking into your pillow, the darkness of the room now wrapping around you like an old, familiar blanket. That half-forgotten text, yeah, the one you've read 100 times but never replied to, is still sitting there on your phone, taunting you. You know you should just delete it and move on, but something in you lingers, stuck in the waiting game. Why does this feel so painful? They weren't that important, were they? So why do you feel like you've lost something irreplaceable? Let's take a look inside. This lingering attachment you feel isn't just about the person themselves. It's about how they interacted with the parts of you that crave connection. This is where attachment theory makes its grand entrance. You see, humans are biologically wired to seek out and form connections with others. In fact, a solid bond is as essential to your mental health as food and water. And when a relationship, even one that was never truly official, comes to an abrupt end, it activates something deep inside you. That emotional withdrawal can feel like detoxing from a substance your body has come to rely on. Here's the psychology truth. The brain has a system of attachment bonds that tie us to the people we form these emotional connections with. It's the thing that keeps you thinking about them long after they've stopped thinking about you. The moment that bond is threatened, your brain goes into full-on panic mode, like a frantic 911 call to your emotional regulation system. Now, you know that attachment is a complicated thing. There's not just one kind. There are three main categories of attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant. The anxious type, let's call them the emotional rollercoaster riders, tend to feel a lot of stress when their relationships get shaky. They might stay up late wondering why someone hasn't replied or obsessing over a conversation that ended on a neutral note. For these individuals, even an almost relationship can trigger an emotional storm. And if your style leans anxious, that feeling of longing for someone who didn't give you their full attention can be amplified to near obsession. Here's where it gets interesting. Attachment theory isn't just about relationships with partners. It starts from birth. Your earliest interactions with caregivers shape how you approach all future relationships. If you experienced inconsistent or absent caregiving as a child, your adult relationships can carry that same emotional residue. That's why a relationship that never truly began can stir up emotions that feel like you're losing something important, because your inner child is still waiting for that connection to feel safe. But wait, there's a twist in this attachment theory tale. Scientists still argue whether these attachment styles are purely formed by our early relationships or whether they can evolve through experience. like a butterfly coming out of its cocoon. Some experts say that people can change their attachment patterns with therapy, self-awareness, and strong emotional support. Others argue that our early bonds leave an indelible mark that we carry through our lives. That's a lot of baggage, isn't it? But here's the thing. Whether you're the anxious, avoidant, or secure type, the reality is this: when you're in a situation with someone who leaves you guessing, your attachment system goes haywire. The lack of closure, it feels like emotional whiplash. And the absence of closure, it lingers. That person, though they barely existed in the way you hoped, occupies an uncomfortably large space in your mental real estate. That space gets louder, clearer, and more persistent the more you deny it. So now, as you lay there, replaying moments that never fully formed, what are you really missing? Is it the person, or is it the lack of answers? The absence of a definitive ending. There's something almost soothing in the chaos of not knowing. It lets your mind linger on the hope that it could have been more, which is much easier to accept than the finality of it never being anything at all. A more fringe angle. Consider this. Some psychologists suggest that people who've never fully learned to trust themselves, inner critics, tend to project this uncertainty onto others. You wait for external validation because, deep down, you're not quite sure who you are without someone else's mirror. That constant search for approval or recognition can lead to over-investing emotionally in situations that were always going to be dead ends. And because those scenarios were never truly aligned with who you are, you end up chasing shadows instead of true connection. You see a story that isn't there, and then your mind gets fixated on finishing it. Historians still argue whether attachment styles are fluid over time or largely set by childhood. But what's universally true? You were never truly attached to the person who didn't stay. You were attached to the idea of what they could have been and what they could have offered you. That lingering connection, it's your brain holding on to hope that the fairy tale isn't over yet. But that's the illusion, isn't it? Even if they hadn't been fully present, even if they barely scratched the surface of your needs, the attachment system in your brain can't help but search for something deeper. And in that search, the more you replay everything in your head, the words they said, the tone, the look in their eyes, the more you're building a relationship with an idea, not a person. So why do we hang on to that idea? Because letting go means accepting something even harder. The fact that we can be deeply impacted by someone who may not have even known what they were doing to us. That kind of vulnerability is not something most people want to face. It's much easier to cling to the fantasy of what could have been, hoping for that magical second chance that might never come. And that is why, even when you're 90% sure they were never really there in the first place, there's still that 10% of you that can't quite shut it off. That 10% is the part of you still hoping, still imagining, still projecting, and in that moment, it's okay to feel like this one was different. You might have tried to shake it off by now, but here we are, still feeling the weight of that connection that wasn't even there. It's easy to convince yourself that you're just overthinking, that you're better off moving on. But every time you open your social media feed and see a random post, or hear a song on the radio that vaguely reminds you of them, your brain does the thing it always does. It loops back to those little snippets of moments that felt so real at the time. A smile, a glance, a text, a gesture. The mind is funny like that, isn't it? It holds on to the things that were never meant to stick. Why? The human brain is designed to seek patterns. Whether those patterns are healthy or not. It's what keeps you alive, makes you predict the future, helps you understand the world. But here's the trick: when you get attached to someone who wasn't really there, your brain latches onto the incomplete pieces of the puzzle. It wants to fill in the blanks. So, your brain doesn't see the situation for what it truly was. Instead, it fills in the gaps with what could have been. Those gaps, they're a breeding ground for your emotional attachment. Think about it. Your brain is a master of storytelling. It thrives on continuity, on filling in the dots. And when a person is involved who didn't truly commit or was only half present, your mind starts creating a version of them that might never have existed. It imagines conversations, future plans, and promises that were never made. And what's even more frustrating is that it does this without you even noticing. You wake up one day and realize that the bond you've built in your mind is stronger than anything that actually took place. Here's where it gets even more fascinating: those feelings you're having. The longing, the need for something that wasn't really there. It's not just emotional, it's physical. Your body responds to these emotional experiences like they're real events, triggering the release of dopamine and oxytocin, the hormones responsible for connection and reward. In the simplest terms, your body gets addicted to the chemical rush that comes from thinking about this person. Even if they didn't fully exist in your life, these hormones act like tiny puzzle pieces, telling your brain, yes, this feels good, keep going, keep thinking about them. So, your brain loops, and you fall deeper into the cycle, convinced that something important is being missed. Now, you've probably heard of cognitive dissonance, right? That little voice inside that fights to keep things in line with your existing beliefs. It's powerful stuff. When there's a disconnect between your emotional experience and reality, cognitive dissonance kicks in to protect you from discomfort. If you've been investing in someone emotionally, no matter how little they gave back, your brain will convince you that they were worth it, that it was real. This psychological trickery keeps you from seeing things clearly. So, you find yourself convincing others, and maybe even yourself, that this was a real connection, even if it wasn't. But here's the punchline: cognitive dissonance doesn't just protect us from emotional pain. It actually makes it harder to move on. Ever notice how, the more you try to forget someone, the more their absence seems to consume your thoughts? It's like your brain is constantly working against you, trying to protect the story you've told yourself about the relationship. Every time you try to rationalize why it didn't work out, it justifies staying stuck in a cycle of rumination. In this way, cognitive dissonance becomes a barrier to closure. Now, here's an interesting tidbit. Some psychologists propose that these lingering feelings of attachment to people who were never really there may be a survival mechanism. Why? Think about how long humans have been wired for connection. Back in the days when survival depended on group cohesion, your mind learned that maintaining relationships, even brief ones, could be crucial for emotional well-being. So, even in situations where the relationship is fleeting or one-sided, your brain has an evolutionary tendency to keep looking for reasons why it should matter. Your body craves connection because, in ancient times, isolation could quite literally mean death. Fast forward to today, and that primal instinct still lingers in your subconscious, even if the stakes are far less dramatic. Historians still argue whether these attachment patterns have a biological or purely social origin. Some believe attachment is a fundamental, evolved trait that keeps us bonded to others for survival. Others argue that culture and societal expectations shape how we form and maintain these bonds, suggesting that the current pace of social relationships, and the fleeting nature of modern romance, has outpaced our biological wiring. Regardless, this primal need to connect often leaves us clinging to relationships that were never really built to last. And the frustration of feeling like you're missing something, that you're grieving a connection that wasn't truly there, might just be your brain's misguided way of keeping you emotionally safe. It doesn't stop at just craving connection though. What makes this even trickier is how emotionally intense it gets. The deeper you feel this loss, the stronger the sense of attachment. This is where the concept of emotional flooding comes in, when you're overwhelmed with all the feelings and memories connected to someone who wasn't really there. Emotional flooding can hijack your thoughts, making it nearly impossible to focus on anything else. So, the attachment that wasn't truly grounded in reality becomes a source of intense emotional turbulence. And let's be real, that intensity feels real. So, here you are, thinking you're just trying to shake off someone who didn't even give you a proper goodbye. But as the night continues, your brain keeps filling in those blanks, convincing you that they're worth the wait, worth the longing, and the cycle repeats, again and again. It's a kind of emotional tug-of-war that leaves you tangled in the idea of someone who barely existed in the first place. And the worst part, your brain has already written the ending. But deep down, You know you might never get to see how the story truly plays out. But what if I told you that you are the one holding the pen? That you have more control over this cycle of attachment than you realize? It's a tough pill to swallow. But it's true. The key to moving past someone who wasn't truly there, and finally breaking free from the mental loop, lies in understanding that the story doesn't have to continue. You don't have to give this person or this relationship any more of your mental or emotional energy. The power to rewrite the narrative is in your hands. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine you're holding a pen, poised over a blank page. The old story you've been repeating is there, on the verge of taking over again, ready to continue where it left off. But what if you chose not to? What if you didn't let that person, the one who barely entered your life, the one who never truly committed, take up any more space in your mind? What if you chose to let go of the unspoken future that you've been projecting onto them? The power to change the story is right there, waiting for you. It sounds easier said than done, right? The hardest part is often recognizing the need to rewrite the script. The emotional investment, no matter how small, leaves a deep mark, but it's a mark you can erase. How do you do that? First, acknowledge that you've been attached to the idea of a connection that wasn't rooted in reality. Recognize that your emotions are based on a narrative your brain created, not on what actually transpired. This realization alone starts to crack the illusion. Once you've identified the truth, that this was never really a healthy attachment to begin with, you can begin to deconstruct it. Cognitive reframing is one way to do this. It's a mental strategy where you intentionally challenge the thoughts and beliefs you've been holding onto, especially the ones that no longer serve you. Instead of telling yourself, "I'm missing out on something real," shift that thought to, "I'm letting go of something that was never meant to be." By reshaping the narrative, you can start to let go of the emotional residue that's been left behind. Another powerful technique is mindfulness. When the thoughts of them start to creep back into your mind, instead of getting swept away by them, practice observing them without judgment. Imagine the thoughts as clouds drifting through your mental sky. You don't need to grab onto each one. You don't need to assign meaning to them. Just let them pass. This takes practice, but over time, it helps loosen the grip those thoughts have on your emotions. But it's not just about changing the thoughts, it's about changing the way you relate to them. Instead of acting like these thoughts have any power over your happiness or well-being, challenge them. Ask yourself, what would my life look like if I stopped holding on to this attachment? What would my future look like if I let go of this person and this narrative completely? By shifting your focus away from the past and onto your own future, you begin to take back the power that was given to someone who never truly deserved it. It's also important to focus on healing your emotional wounds from past experiences. Attachment isn't just about one person. It's a pattern that repeats itself when old wounds haven't been properly addressed. If you've been vulnerable to these kinds of attachments before, it might be helpful to look deeper into your own emotional needs. Ask yourself, what am I really longing for? What was I hoping to find in this person that I'm not giving to myself? Healing from attachment wounds means learning to give yourself the love, validation, and security you've been seeking from others. This is where self-compassion comes in. Treat yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend who was in the same situation. Once you start to give yourself that validation, the attachment to the other person will begin to weaken. It's like a muscle. Self-love and validation grow stronger the more you practice them. You might not feel it immediately, but every time you choose yourself over someone who didn't prioritize you, you're strengthening your emotional boundaries. And these boundaries will protect you from future attachments that aren't in alignment with your values. But it's not just about healing from the past. It's also about reimagining the future. As you begin to release the hold this person has over your thoughts, you free up emotional space for something, or someone, much more fulfilling. You open the door to healthier, more authentic connections. The next time someone enters your life, you'll be more discerning, more grounded in your own sense of self-worth. You'll know that you don't need to create a narrative to fill in the gaps. You'll trust your instincts and make sure that the people who come into your life are worthy of your time, your energy, and your heart. Here's the thing. People who show up half-heartedly, who come into your life just to leave you in limbo, don't deserve your time. They don't deserve your emotional energy. And if you're stuck in this cycle with someone who barely made an impact, it's time to face the uncomfortable truth. They were never meant to be a permanent part of your story. They were a lesson, a mirror reflecting something about yourself that needed healing. And once you learn that lesson, you can release them with gratitude instead of longing. The final piece of the puzzle, understanding that you are not defined by anyone else's actions or inactions. The beauty of moving on from someone who never truly invested in you is that you get to write your own story. A story that is free from the shadows of someone who never deserved a leading role. This is your life. You get to decide who belongs in it and who doesn't. It's time to reclaim the pen, to finish the story that was always meant to be about you. As you start to let go of the attachment to someone who wasn't truly there, you might find yourself faced with a powerful question. Why did I invest so much emotional energy in something that wasn't real? This is where the heart of the issue lies. The emotional pain from this situation isn't just about missing the person, it's about what they represented. It's about the dream you had, the version of the future that was never really possible. And that's exactly what makes moving on so difficult. You're grieving an illusion, but once you realize that, you begin to understand the emotional investment wasn't in the person, but in an idealized version of them. This idea isn't just a psychological theory. It's something that's been explored in depth by attachment theory. Attachment theory, which was first developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, explains how we form emotional bonds with others. These bonds can shape how we experience relationships throughout our lives. We tend to form attachments based on our early experiences with caregivers. And these attachments inform how we connect with others as adults. But here's the thing. Sometimes, those attachments aren't rooted in reality. They're based on expectations we've created or projected onto others. And when those projections don't align with reality, that's when the emotional pain kicks in. Think about it. How often do you invest in someone based on what you think they could be, rather than who they actually are? It's a trap many of us fall into. Maybe they're charming, or maybe they say all the right things. Maybe they seem to want the same things you do. You create this idealized image of them in your mind, and you build an emotional investment based on that. But when the reality doesn't match up to your fantasy, the emotional letdown can feel crushing. Historians and psychologists still argue whether this idealization of others is a natural part of human behavior or a byproduct of modern dating culture. Some suggest that it's rooted in our evolutionary need for connection and love, while others point to the societal pressures that encourage us to pursue perfect relationships. Either way, it's clear that idealization plays a huge role in why we feel so attached to people who were never really there for us. And breaking free from that attachment requires a major shift in perspective. What happens when the reality doesn't align with your projections? You start to feel disillusioned. And that's where the grief begins. But here's the interesting thing. This grief isn't just about losing a person, it's also about losing an idea. The grieving process in these situations is often overlooked, but it's a crucial part of moving forward. You've lost something that never really existed in the first place. The person, in their idealized form, was never truly there for you in the ways that matter. And yet, the emotional attachment to that version of them can feel just as real as any other loss. One of the most powerful things you can do during this grieving process is to focus on the lessons. What did you learn from this experience? What did it teach you about yourself, about your needs, and about your relationship with others? Instead of seeing the situation as a failure, reframe it as an opportunity for personal growth. This process allows you to step back, take stock of what went wrong, and, more importantly, identify the red flags that you might have ignored earlier. It's not about blaming yourself for the emotional investment you made, but about understanding why you invested in the first place. For example, were you seeking validation from someone who never really showed up for you? Were you holding on to the hope that they might change, even though all the signs pointed to the fact that they never would? Sometimes we continue to invest in relationships because we're hoping for something that we think we need, something like validation, attention, or affection. But this kind of attachment isn't sustainable. You can't build a healthy relationship based on the fantasy of what someone could be. That's why, when things fall apart, it feels like the rug has been pulled out from under you. And yet, the process of grieving this fantasy attachment can ultimately be a powerful tool for self-discovery. It forces you to confront your own needs and desires in a way that nothing else can. Instead of remaining stuck in a cycle of longing for someone who wasn't truly there for you, you can focus on fulfilling those needs on your own. It's about taking back your power and learning how to meet your own emotional needs, rather than relying on someone else to do it for you. This might sound like a lofty goal, but in reality, it's one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself. As you work through the grief and release the attachment, you'll begin to see the situation more clearly. You'll start to see that this person, who you once believed could fulfill all your emotional needs, was never truly capable of doing so. And that's when the real healing begins. Once you're able to release them, and more importantly, release the idealized version of them, you can begin to rebuild your emotional landscape. The grief, though painful, will begin to transform into something much more powerful: self-awareness, self-compassion, and emotional freedom. When you stop missing the person who wasn't truly there, you stop giving him the power to control your emotions. The next time you find yourself feeling attached to someone who doesn't truly show up, you'll be more prepared, you'll recognize the signs sooner, and you'll be able to detach more easily. And that's where the real strength lies, not in holding on to something that was never meant to be, but in being able to let go. Now that you've started to understand why you miss someone who wasn't really there, it's time to explore the deeper emotional mechanisms that make this happen. In these situations, your brain isn't just processing the absence of the person, it's also dealing with the void they leave behind. It's the absence that's the problem, not necessarily the person themselves. The emptiness left by someone who never really showed up can trigger a whole range of emotions. And these emotions can feel far more intense than the situation may warrant. The reason this emptiness feels so unsettling is tied to the way your brain works. You're dealing with a psychological concept known as the reward system. When you get attention, affection, or validation from someone, your brain releases dopamine, the feel-good chemical that reinforces those behaviors. Over time, if you've been attached to someone who wasn't really present, you've probably been caught in a cycle where you're seeking their attention or validation. Even if it's fleeting or inconsistent, this cycle rewires your brain to expect that validation. And when it's no longer available, your brain craves it even more. This craving for validation is part of human nature. Psychologist Abraham Maslow famously outlined a hierarchy of needs, with emotional and social connection sitting near the top of that pyramid. According to Maslow, after our basic physiological needs are met, the next thing we seek is safety, love, and belonging. When we feel like these needs are being met, whether by a partner, friend, or even a social media following, we feel a sense of fulfillment. But when those needs are threatened, the resulting emptiness can be overwhelming. This feeling of emotional deprivation can fuel an almost obsessive longing for someone who isn't there. Psychologists debate whether the intensity of this longing is tied to an evolutionary need for connection or whether it's a result of modern-day relationship dynamics, where we are often exposed to a constant stream of potential partners via social media. Some experts believe that this overexposure is partly responsible for our inability to let go of unattainable relationships. The idea that we can easily replace one connection with another can sometimes make us feel like we're constantly searching for something that isn't there. The difficulty of letting go becomes even more complex when you factor in the emotional high that comes with intermittent reinforcement. If you've ever had an on-again, off-again relationship, you've probably experienced this phenomenon. The moments when the person shows up, even just for a fleeting second, feel incredibly rewarding, like a rush of dopamine to your system. But the longer they stay absent, the more you crave that hit of emotional validation. It becomes a cycle where you're constantly striving for something you can't fully grasp, which just makes the emotional attachment that much harder to break. Think of it this way. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a cliff, and you're just a little bit too far away from the edge to reach it. You stretch, you reach, you try again and again, but the farther you go, the more frustrated you get. The more your brain craves that moment of victory, the rush of reaching what you desire. The same is true with emotional attachments. The more you try to connect with someone who isn't truly there for you, the more your brain reinforces that craving. It's this ongoing chase that keeps the attachment alive, even when logic tells you it's unhealthy. But here's the catch. Even though your brain may crave that validation, you'll eventually come to realize that no amount of emotional chasing will ever be enough. The relationship was never as fulfilling as your brain made it out to be. It's like trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. It doesn't matter how much you pour in, it will never feel full. And that's the sad truth of attachment to someone who isn't really there. No matter how much you try to get him to meet your emotional needs, it will always feel incomplete. The relationship wasn't built on a solid foundation, it was built on the emotional equivalent of quicksand. The more you understand about the ways your brain works, the better equipped you'll be to break free from this cycle. Recognizing that the emotional longing you feel is actually your brain's way of seeking something it's been conditioned to expect can be a powerful realization. The key to moving forward is not just about letting go of the person, it's about letting go of the cycle itself. This requires rewiring your brain to seek fulfillment from within, rather than from someone who wasn't capable of fulfilling your needs in the first place. Psychologists have long debated the role of attachment styles in how we form relationships. Secure attachment, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment are all terms used to describe how we interact with others, especially in romantic contexts. If you've been in a situation where you miss someone who wasn't really there, chances are you may have fallen into an anxious attachment pattern. Anxiously attached individuals tend to seek constant reassurance from their partners, often fearing abandonment. This attachment style makes it particularly difficult to break free from the cycle of longing for someone who isn't fully present, because their absence triggers the very fears that anxious individuals struggle with: the fear of being left behind or rejected. So, what can you do to break free from this cycle? The first step is to acknowledge that it's happening. Recognize the patterns in your behavior and how they're affecting your emotional well-being. Once you've identified the emotional cycle, it's time to reprogram your brain by learning to fulfill your emotional needs independently. This might involve focusing on building a stronger sense of self-worth, developing new sources of validation, and seeking out healthier relationships that are built on mutual respect and real connection. But breaking free from this cycle isn't easy. It's a gradual process that involves both emotional healing and self-reflection. Over time, the craving for someone who wasn't really there will begin to fade. The void they left behind will no longer feel so overwhelming, and in its place, you'll find a more grounded sense of emotional fulfillment, one that comes from within, rather than relying on someone who was never truly there for you. As you begin to understand the deeper psychological reasons behind why we miss people who were never really there, it's important to take a moment to think about how this process ties into your broader emotional development. How you deal with these feelings, and how you process your attachments, has long-term effects on the way you approach future relationships, both with others and with yourself. The way you react to emotional deprivation in one relationship can spill over into other areas of your life, affecting friendships, work, and even your relationship with your own sense of self-worth. When you're constantly longing for someone who isn't there for you, it sets a pattern for how you perceive relationships. This pattern might make you more prone to idealizing future partners or viewing your connections through an unrealistic lens. You might expect them to fulfill needs that are inherently unfulfillable. Psychologists refer to this as projection, where you project the hopes, dreams, and expectations you have onto another person, regardless of whether they're capable of meeting them. And this projection isn't just limited to romantic relationships, it can extend to friendships. family members, or even co-workers. The problem with this is that projection doesn't just lead to disappointment, it can lead to feelings of inadequacy when your needs aren't met. This inadequacy comes from the realization that the connection you were hoping for wasn't grounded in reality. Over time, this disappointment can lead to bitterness, resentment, or even self-doubt. You might wonder what you did wrong, why you couldn't make things work with someone who wasn't really ever invested in you. And here's the tricky part. The disappointment you feel isn't just about the other person, it's about your own expectations. And those expectations have been shaped by the emotional patterns you formed over time. The attachment system in your brain is complex. When you form bonds with people, your brain creates neural pathways that reinforce the feelings associated with those bonds. When those bonds are broken, or when someone isn't fully present in your life, it leaves a gap in those neural pathways. This gap creates what's known as an emotional scar, and it can take years to heal. But healing is possible, and the process starts with recognizing that these emotional scars don't define you. They're simply a part of your growth. This is where the concept of self-love comes in. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, but there's more to it than just treating yourself to a nice bath or a glass of wine after a rough day. True self-love is about developing the emotional tools you need to be your own source of validation. When you become self-reliant in terms of emotional fulfillment, the longing for someone who wasn't really there fades. You begin to realize that the person you've been missing was just one small part of a much larger picture. In psychology, there's an idea called self-compassion. This is the practice of treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a close friend who was struggling. When you stop blaming yourself for the emotional void left by someone else's absence, you open the door to self-healing. Self-compassion teaches you to embrace the discomfort of longing without letting it define you or control you. It's about understanding that missing someone who wasn't really there doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And just like any other emotion, it will pass in time. The good news is that when you learn to treat yourself with compassion, you break the emotional cycle that keeps you stuck in longing. You become less likely to engage in unhealthy patterns of attachment in future relationships. Instead, you start to build connections that are based on mutual respect and true emotional availability. But to get to that point, you need to acknowledge the impact that unfulfilled attachment has had on you. And that means sitting with the discomfort of unrequited love or attention and being okay with it. Think about it. The emotional scars from relationships that didn't work out aren't permanent. They're opportunities for growth. When you begin to view those scars as markers of resilience, rather than proof of inadequacy, you start to heal. This healing process is empowering. It allows you to step into future relationships with more emotional clarity and less baggage. It also encourages you to let go of unrealistic expectations. You'll stop expecting someone to fill a void that can only be filled by yourself. And in doing so, you'll be better equipped to recognize relationships that offer genuine emotional support, rather than those that are built on fleeting moments of validation. Now, all of this sounds well and good in theory, but there's no denying that the emotional scars from unfulfilled attachments can be difficult to heal. It's not just a matter of getting over it. Healing takes time, effort, and a lot of self-awareness. So, how do you take the first steps toward this healing process? It starts with self-reflection. Take a moment to ask yourself what you've been expecting from relationships. Have you been hoping for someone to give you something you weren't able to give yourself? Have you been holding on to the idea of someone who wasn't really there because you were afraid of being alone? Asking these questions is the first step toward freeing yourself from the emotional cycles that hold you back. Once you acknowledge these patterns, you can start the work of reprogramming your brain and your heart to seek out healthier, more balanced connections. And this journey isn't just about romantic relationships, it's about cultivating a deeper, more loving relationship with yourself. Now that you've started to understand the psychological mechanics behind why you miss someone who was never truly there, it's time to dive deeper into how this all affects your perception of self-worth. What happens when you form attachments to people who don't reciprocate in a meaningful way? More often than not, these attachments can chip away at your sense of self-esteem. Without even realizing it, you may begin to internalize the idea that you aren't good enough, or that you aren't worthy of the kind of love and attention you crave. This isn't just about feeling lonely, it's about the quiet erosion of your belief in your own value. In fact, studies show that unreciprocated love or attention can lead to what psychologists call attachment anxiety. This anxiety stems from the uncertainty you feel when you're emotionally invested in someone who isn't available or committed. The inconsistency of their behavior keeps you on edge, making you feel like you're constantly walking on emotional eggshells. This inconsistency doesn't just keep you in a cycle of longing, it also undermines your confidence in the future. When someone you care about is hot and cold, it's easy to start questioning whether you can trust anyone at all. But here's the kicker: this anxiety doesn't always fade when the relationship ends. In fact, for some, it carries over into future relationships, creating a pattern of seeking out emotionally unavailable people. This can feel almost like a subconscious drive. You might find yourself gravitating toward people who don't offer the love and support you need because, in some strange way, it feels familiar. You've been conditioned to seek out relationships where you're unsure of where you stand. But why? The root of this behavior often lies in what psychologists call attachment styles. These styles, developed in early childhood, govern the way you approach relationships throughout your life. People with anxious attachment styles, for example, tend to be preoccupied with their relationships and constantly worry about their partner's availability and affection. It's not that they don't want closeness, they crave it deeply. But the inconsistency of love and affection they experience growing up leaves them with a deep-seated fear that others won't meet their emotional needs. So, in adulthood, they seek out situations that mirror that uncertainty. Interestingly, attachment styles can be modified over time. If you've been in relationships where you've felt neglected or emotionally distant, there's a good chance you're in the process of developing an anxious attachment style. But that doesn't mean you're doomed to this pattern forever. Understanding your attachment style is the first step toward healing. Once you recognize how you react to love, affection, and attention, you can begin to challenge those deeply ingrained patterns and make conscious choices that support your emotional well-being. It's important to note that attachment theory isn't one size fits all. Just as no two people are the same, no two attachment experiences are identical. Some people may be more avoidant, pushing away others in an attempt to protect themselves from the vulnerability of emotional attachment. Others may exhibit a disorganized attachment style, where they experience both anxiety and avoidance in relationships. The complexity of these attachment styles explains why someone might miss someone who was never truly there. They're projecting unmet emotional needs onto the other person, hoping to fill the void with affection that may never come. However, even though attachment styles can be shaped by past experiences, they're not set in stone. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, mindfulness practices, and journaling are all effective tools that can help rewire the brain and reframe these patterns. By becoming more aware of your emotional reactions, you can start making choices that align with your true needs. Instead of waiting for someone to give you the validation you crave, you can begin to give that validation to yourself. The thing about attachment is that it's not inherently negative, it's a natural, instinctual part of being human. In fact, attachment is necessary for survival, especially in childhood. But when attachment becomes toxic, when you're drawn into relationships that drain your energy rather than nourish it, that's when the issue lies. The desire to be loved and to love is a beautiful thing, but it has to be mutual for it to be healthy. Otherwise, you risk being stuck in a cycle of longing for someone who isn't capable of giving you the love and attention you deserve. It's also worth mentioning that missing someone who wasn't really there can sometimes create a false sense of nostalgia. You might find yourself looking back on the relationship, remembering all the good times, and forgetting the ways in which the person let you down. This is known as rosy retrospection. Your brain tends to soften the edges of painful experiences over time. And in doing so, it can trick you into thinking that the relationship had more potential than it really did. This distorted view of the past can keep you trapped in the fantasy of what could have been, rather than seeing the reality of what the relationship truly was. To overcome this, you need to get brutally honest with yourself. Take a moment to evaluate the relationship objectively. Ask yourself, what did you really gain from it? Were your emotional needs met? Or were you constantly chasing after something that was never truly there? By taking a step back and viewing the situation with clarity, you can start to break free from the fantasy and focus on building healthier, more fulfilling connections in the future. When you can finally accept that the person you were longing for wasn't really available to you in the way you needed, you'll feel a sense of liberation. You'll stop measuring your self-worth by someone else's actions or lack thereof. Instead, you'll learn to value yourself and your own emotional health, independent of external validation, and in doing so, you'll open yourself up to the possibility of real, genuine love and connection, one that is grounded in reality, not fantasy. As you move further along this journey of understanding why you miss people who were never really there, it's time to talk about how nostalgia plays a role in keeping this cycle alive. Nostalgia is a powerful emotion that can make you feel like you're reconnecting with someone from your past. But often, it's not the person you're really missing, it's the version of them that exists in your mind. The version you've carefully curated and perfected through memories. This idealized version can distort your perception of reality and keep you tethered to something that isn't truly there. Nostalgia acts like a filter, softening the edges of painful memories and amplifying the good ones. You may remember the moments when the person showed you love, care, or attention, but you tend to forget the ways in which they let you down or left you wanting more. This is what psychologists call selective memory. Your brain tends to prioritize the positive experiences while burying the negative ones, making it easier for you to hold on to the illusion of a perfect relationship that never actually existed. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but those moments felt real. And yes, they absolutely did. It's not about denying the authenticity of the emotions you felt, it's about acknowledging that those emotions were real. But the relationship itself may not have been. This is a crucial step in breaking free from the emotional grip of someone who wasn't really there. You have to be willing to see the relationship for what it truly was, not what you wish it had been. The danger in nostalgia is that it can keep you stuck in the past, preventing you from moving forward and healing. It's easy to get lost in the fantasy of what could have been. But when you're holding onto a memory of a person who wasn't truly emotionally available, you're also holding yourself back from experiencing the potential of someone who can offer you the love and attention you deserve. And while that might sound harsh, it's an important truth to accept if you want to break the cycle of longing. The key to overcoming the grip of nostalgia is to practice self-compassion and mindfulness. When you feel the urge to revisit those memories, take a moment to ground yourself in the present. Recognize that you're not just yearning for a person, you're yearning for connection, affection, and the sense of belonging that you missed. But those things aren't confined to the past. They're available to you right now, and they can be found in healthy, supportive relationships that are based on mutual care and respect. Historians still argue whether nostalgia has a purely positive or negative effect on well-being. Some suggest that it can be a source of comfort, helping you process grief and loss by keeping cherished memories alive. Others argue that it can be detrimental, preventing you from fully embracing the present moment. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. Nostalgia, like any emotion, is not inherently good or bad. It's how you respond to it that makes the difference. One way to shift your focus from nostalgia to the present is to cultivate new experiences and relationships that can fill the void left by someone who wasn't really there. Start by engaging in activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. Take up a new hobby, explore new friendships, or focus on your personal growth. The more you invest in yourself and in the present, the less power nostalgia will have over you. It's not about erasing the past, but about making room for new memories that are rooted in reality. Another way to combat the pull of nostalgia is by setting boundaries with your thoughts. When you catch yourself slipping into the old patterns of longing for someone who wasn't truly there, gently remind yourself that those feelings are based on an idealized version of the relationship. You're not missing the real person, you're missing the emotional high of being wanted and valued. That's a need you can fulfill within yourself, not from someone else. As you work through these emotions, it's also important to acknowledge the role of self-worth in the equation. If you spent a lot of time missing someone who wasn't truly there, it's likely that your sense of value has been affected. You may have placed your self-esteem in the hands of someone else's affection or attention, which is never a sustainable foundation. But the good news is that self-worth isn't something that depends on others. It's something you can cultivate from within. By recognizing your own strengths, achievements, and unique qualities, you'll start to realize that you don't need anyone's validation to feel whole. This doesn't mean that you should shut yourself off from love or affection. On the contrary, embracing healthy relationships is essential for your well-being. But these relationships should be built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and clear communication, not on the fleeting highs and lows of unreciprocated feelings. As you continue to heal and let go of the attachment to someone who wasn't really there, you'll likely find that your emotional landscape begins to shift. You'll stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to show up for you, and you'll start recognizing that you are enough as you are. This is the true freedom that comes from breaking free of the cycle of longing for someone who isn't truly present. In this section, we've touched on the role of nostalgia in keeping you emotionally tethered to someone who wasn't really there. It's easy to get caught up in the fantasy of what could have been. But breaking free from this illusion is essential for moving forward. By practicing mindfulness, setting boundaries with your thoughts, and cultivating self-worth, you'll be able to let go of the past and embrace the present with open arms. As we dive deeper into the intricacies of why we miss people who were never really there, it's important to address the role of emotional attachment and why it can feel so difficult to detach yourself from someone who never fully reciprocated your feelings. The human need for connection runs deep, and when we invest emotionally in a relationship, our brains release oxytocin, the hormone often referred to as the bonding hormone. This neurochemical is responsible for feelings of trust, closeness, and affection. When you're emotionally attached to someone, your brain becomes wired to crave that bond, even if the person isn't fully there for you in the way you need them to be. The tricky part is that the brain doesn't always distinguish between a healthy bond and one that's based on unhealthy patterns. In other words, the brain can become addicted to the rush of connection, even if that connection is inconsistent, one-sided, or even damaging. This is why, even when you know someone wasn't really there for you, you may still long for their presence. The brain has learned to associate their presence, or even the potential of their presence, with the comfort of emotional release. And breaking free from this cycle can feel like a withdrawal process. Emotional attachment can be so powerful that it distorts your perception of the relationship. You might start to ignore or downplay the red flags that were present all along, focusing instead on the highs that you shared. This is where the concept of cognitive dissonance comes in. Cognitive dissonance occurs when there is a conflict between what you know to be true and how you feel. For example, you may know that the person wasn't really there for you, but your emotional attachment causes you to feel like they were, which creates a sense of inattention. To alleviate this discomfort, your mind might attempt to rationalize or justify the relationship, even if the facts don't line up. This psychological phenomenon is why it's so hard to let go of someone who wasn't truly there for you. The emotions associated with attachment are deeply ingrained in your brain, making it difficult to break the cycle. But the good news is that, just like with any addiction, it's possible to retrain your brain to associate new, healthier patterns of attachment with other relationships or experiences. This takes time and self-awareness, but it's a journey worth taking. Historians still argue whether emotional attachment is purely a biological function or if it's shaped by societal and cultural factors. Some psychologists argue that the need for attachment is universal, hardwired into our DNA as a means of ensuring survival and social bonding. Others suggest that attachment styles can vary widely across cultures and individuals, influenced by early childhood experiences, family dynamics, and societal expectations. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear: emotional attachment is a fundamental part of human nature, and breaking free from it requires conscious effort. The first step in detaching from someone who wasn't really there for you is acknowledging the emotional attachment for what it is. Recognizing that your brain has become conditioned to crave the connection, even when it wasn't healthy, is an essential part of the healing process. Once you can see the relationship for what it truly was, you can begin to break the emotional ties that bind you to it. One effective way to start this process is through mindfulness. By being present in the moment and observing your thoughts without judgment, you can create the space needed to detach emotionally. Instead of allowing your mind to spiral into longing for someone who wasn't really there, you can gently redirect your focus to the present. This can be as simple as paying attention to your breathing or engaging in activities that help you stay grounded in the here and now. The more you practice mindfulness, the less power your emotional attachment will have over you. Another helpful technique is journaling. Writing down your thoughts and emotions can provide clarity and insight into why you feel so attached to someone who wasn't fully present. When you put your feelings on paper, it allows you to process them from a distance, making it easier to see the relationship for what it truly was. It can also help you identify any patterns in your behavior or thinking that have kept you stuck in the attachment. As you work through these emotions, it's important to be kind to yourself. Detaching from someone who wasn't really there is not an easy task, and it's likely that you'll experience moments of weakness or doubt along the way. But remember, healing is a process, and it takes time. Don't rush yourself or judge your feelings. Instead, focus on small steps forward, whether that means setting boundaries with your thoughts, practicing self-compassion, or seeking support from others who understand what you're going through. You might also find that seeking professional help can be beneficial during this time. A therapist or counselor can provide valuable insight into the dynamics of emotional attachment and offer strategies for overcoming unhealthy patterns. Sometimes, just talking about your feelings with someone who is neutral and non-judgmental can help you process your emotions and gain the clarity you need to move forward. Ultimately, detaching from someone who wasn't truly there for you is about reclaiming your emotional independence. It's about recognizing that you are worthy of real, reciprocal connections and that your emotional well-being shouldn't depend on someone who was never truly present for you. By retraining your brain to focus on healthier attachments, you can start to build relationships that are grounded in reality, not in the idealized fantasies of what could have been. In this section, we've explored the role of emotional attachment in keeping you bound to someone who wasn't really there for you. From the biological aspects of attachment to the psychological processes that make it so hard to break free. We've looked at why it's so difficult to detach. But with the right tools and strategies, such as mindfulness, journaling, and self-compassion, you can begin to untangle yourself from the emotional grip of an unreciprocated connection. Now that we've discussed the psychological and emotional aspects of why we miss people who weren't really there for us, let's turn our attention to how we can finally begin to heal and move forward. This process is deeply personal, and it can be incredibly difficult, especially when you've invested so much of yourself into a relationship that never truly materialized. But it's also incredibly liberating. Letting go of someone who wasn't truly there for you means opening up space for better relationships that are built on mutual respect, understanding, and real emotional connection. One important thing to remember during this healing process is that healing is not linear. There will be good days and bad days. Some days, you might feel like you've completely moved on, and other days, the longing for that person may resurface unexpectedly. This is completely normal, and it doesn't mean you're back at square one. Healing is more like a spiral than a straight line, and every time you revisit a painful memory or emotion, you have the chance to process it more deeply and let go of it a little more. Be gentle with yourself during this process. You don't have to get everything right all at once. One of the key components of healing from an emotionally one-sided relationship is rediscovering your own sense of self-worth. When we invest so much in someone else, we often lose sight of who we are and what we deserve. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that you aren't worthy of real, meaningful connections because of how you were treated by that person. But that couldn't be further from the truth. You are worthy of love, respect, and genuine companionship. Reaffirming this truth in your own mind is crucial to moving forward. Start by engaging in activities that bring you joy and remind you of your own strengths. This could be as simple as reconnecting with hobbies you've put on the back burner or trying new experiences that push you outside of your comfort zone. When you engage in activities that you truly enjoy, you remind yourself that you are complete on your own. Your worth isn't tied to another person's validation or presence. It's also essential to establish boundaries, both with the person you've been emotionally attached to and with yourself. This might mean unfollowing them on social media or blocking their number to prevent unwanted communication. But it also means setting emotional boundaries, such as not allowing yourself to dwell on memories that cause you pain. The more you practice these boundaries, the more you'll reclaim your emotional power and freedom. Historians still debate whether the ability to set boundaries is a learned skill or something that's more innate to certain individuals. Some psychologists believe that healthy boundaries are a direct result of early childhood experiences and the way we were taught to engage with others. Others argue that boundaries are a skill that can be developed later in life, especially in therapy or through self-reflection. Either way, the act of creating boundaries is essential for protecting your emotional well-being and fostering healthier relationships in the future. In addition to setting boundaries, it's helpful to shift your perspective on what the relationship was. Instead of seeing it as a failure or something that was missing, try to view it as a lesson. Every relationship, whether it lasts or not, teaches us something about ourselves, our needs, and the kind of person we want to be with. Even though this person wasn't there for you in the way you needed, the relationship might have helped you understand more about what you value in a partner or what emotional patterns you need to avoid. Taking the time to reflect on these lessons can help you grow and prepare for more fulfilling connections in the future. Another important step is to surround yourself with a supportive network of friends and family who truly care about you. When you're healing from a one-sided relationship, it can be easy to feel isolated. But the truth is, you don't have to go through it alone. Your loved ones can provide comfort, encouragement, and perspective when you need it most. They can also help you rebuild your self-esteem by reminding you of your worth and the positive qualities that make you lovable and deserving of love. As you continue your journey of healing, you might also find comfort in connecting with others who have gone through similar experiences. Online support groups, therapy, or simply talking to friends who understand can be incredibly validating. Knowing that you're not the only one who's ever felt the sting of longing for someone who wasn't there can be incredibly reassuring. It's important to remember that you're not alone in this, and there are others who can offer insight, compassion, and solidarity as you navigate this difficult time. Eventually, as time passes and you continue to work on your healing, you'll begin to notice a shift. The memories of the person who wasn't truly there for you will start to lose their emotional grip. You'll find yourself thinking of them less and less. And when you do, it won't carry the same weight of longing or sadness. Instead, you'll be able to look back with clarity and understanding, acknowledging that the relationship served its purpose in helping you grow and learn about yourself. And with that, you'll be free to move on and open your heart to new, healthier connections. Healing from a relationship that was never truly mutual isn't easy, but it's possible. By setting boundaries, rediscovering your own worth, and seeking support from others, you can let go of someone who wasn't really there for you and make space for the kind of connection you deserve. You are worthy of love, respect, and genuine emotional connection, and with time, you will find it.